My boyfriend loved playing loyalty tests. He would find people to test whether I was truly devoted to him. Until one day, he approached his uncle, who had just returned from overseas. In the back seat of the car, the man's face remained calm and unreadable, yet his leg lightly brushed against my calf. He tugged at his tie and smiled at me lazily. Your taste has gotten younger, Lily. Damn. This was the real Prince Charming. Chapter 1. Beautiful. Want to see my abs? A social media message popped up from an account whose profile picture showed a muscular man in a black tank top. I blocked and deleted him in one smooth motion. This was the 13th time Lazaro had sent someone to test me. He called it a loyalty test and never seemed to get tired of it. As long as I exchanged even a single message with one of his chosen test subjects, he would throw a huge fit the moment he got home. Every time, I had to exhaust myself trying to comfort him. What could I do? He was exactly my type. Even his friends said that Lazaro only acted this way because he was hopelessly in love with me. He needed constant reassurance of my feelings. Having a rich second-generation heir with such a love-struck personality was supposedly a blessing. I neither agreed nor disagreed. That was until I saw Lazaro's true thoughts through a hidden camera. He sat among the crowd like a young master, one leg crossed over the other, completely different from the affectionate and obedient image he showed in front of me. People around him drank and cheered. Lazaro, who did you send to test her this time? Lazaro grinned carelessly. That pretty boy from the gym. He's probably Lily's type physically, but she already blocked him. Not bad. Lazaro, you've got to admit, Lily really loves you. She didn't fall for that kind of temptation at all. Hearing everyone's admiration, Lazaro merely let out a mocking laugh. If she can't even pass a simple test like that, why would I stay with her? A pretty young woman beside him suddenly leaned forward curiously. Lazaro, what if Lily fails one day? I knew that girl. She was Lazaro's cousin, Laura, the sweet little sister he had repeatedly asked me to take care of. How is that possible? She's completely obsessed with me. Lazaro curled his lips confidently. Then he leaned back against the booth. His narrowed eyes casually swept across Lara's face. If she fails, she'll just end up begging me. Besides, I'm getting bored anyway. He paused before continuing in a suggestive tone. Hell, maybe you and I could give it a try then. The room instantly erupted into cheers. The girl covered her flushed face and complained shyly. What are you saying in front of everyone, Lazaro? I was so absorbed in watching that my phone suddenly chimed. Lily, come meet my uncle tonight. He just came back for the holidays. Looks like the 14th test was about to begin. Chapter 2. Lazaro had told me about his uncle long ago. His childhood had been difficult, and he only returned to the family after growing older. Yet he was disciplined, composed, and incredibly shrewd. With decisive methods alone, he had reclaimed and secured the position of family head. I could tell that Lazaro, as a member of a branch family, admired this man greatly, and I had secretly wondered what he was really like, until those slightly rough fingertips brushed across my palm during our handshake. I stared at the man's sharply defined features and piercing eyes. For a brief moment, I froze. Damn, he really hadn't changed at all. Still unfairly attractive. It was this very face that, despite seeming so distant and untouchable, had once made me lose control and trace every detail of it again and again. When I came back to my senses, he had already released my hand. Pressing his lips together, the man spoke in a low voice. Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Calvin, Lazaro's uncle. He looked exactly as though we were meeting for the first time. At that moment, Lazaro finally arrived. What he saw was Calvin and me standing awkwardly face to face. Understanding immediately, he smiled and led us into the restaurant. Sorry, uncle, I'm late. Lily didn't neglect you, did she? At those words, Calvin's deep eyes landed on me. He hadn't said a single thing, yet my body nearly went weak. My high heels slipped to one side. A strong hand caught me by the waist. The heat of his body spread through me before he quickly let go. His polite voice sounded beside my ear. Are you all right? And right then, I remembered. A snowy winter night in Country A. Inside a cramped basement apartment. He had looked at me with that same gaze. His warm palm braced between me and the bed. Again and again, he asked, Are you all right? Polite, and yet somehow not polite at all. My throat suddenly felt dry. Without thinking, I ran my tongue lightly across my lips. Damn, Lazaro had actually found him. That unattainable moonlight of mine. Chapter 3. During dinner, Lazaro seemed even more excited than usual. He kept making conversation whenever there was a lull. He said, "Uncle, a lot of people say we look alike. They say it's fate. What do you think?" The man's expression didn't change. He simply gave a quiet hum in acknowledgement. Only his gaze drifted subtly in my direction. I immediately lowered my head and took a few more bites of vegetables. Meanwhile, Lazaro continued laughing cheerfully. "But I still think you're more handsome. Uncle, I have a lot to learn from you." Calvin said nothing. He merely nodded lightly, until Lazaro seemingly asked out of curiosity, "Uncle, what do you think of my girlfriend, Lily?" The man's gaze suddenly froze, lowering his eyes. He took a sip of wine. After a long pause, his Adam's apple bobbed. Then he said, "She's very nice." Yet when he said it, he never looked at me, right? "Lily's beautiful. She has a great figure, and she's always saying she can't live without me." Before Lazaro could continue boasting, Calvin stood up and headed for the restroom. A few minutes later, Lazaro, who was sitting beside me, followed him. He stopped Calvin as he came out. "Uncle, can I ask you for a favor?" "What is it?" "I want you to test my girlfriend." "Test what?" For the first time, a trace of emotion entered Calvin's otherwise calm voice. Seeing his confusion, Lazaro quickly explained, "Uncle, I just want you to spend more time around Lily and see whether she'd develop feelings. If she can reject even someone as attractive as you, then I'll finally feel comfortable settling down with her." "You mean?" Calvin raised an eyebrow and interrupted him. "You want me to seduce her?" Perhaps he hadn't expected such blunt wording. Lazaro froze instantly. He opened his mouth, only to find himself unable to argue. Calvin let out a faint chuckle. Half-jokingly, he said, "You certainly trust me a lot." Seeing him smile for the first time, Lazaro brightened immediately. "Of course! You're the gentleman everyone recognizes. There's no way you'd be interested in her." He rubbed the back of his nose and added quietly, "Not that Lily isn't great, but she's definitely not the same kind of person as you." "Is that so?" Calvin murmured softly to himself. A faint smile lingered on his lips. Every word of it was transmitted into my ears through the listening device. Chapter 4. After dinner, the slightly tipsy Lazaro insisted on driving Calvin back to his hotel. On the ride back, he even chose to sit in the front passenger seat himself. He was really pulling out all the stops for this test. I sighed inwardly. Then Calvin and I took our seats in the back. As if by unspoken agreement, we both sat by our respective windows. The space between us felt as vast as a galaxy. The road was unexpectedly bumpy. Warm yellow lights flickered through the car windows. Their glow danced across his profile, casting shifting shadows over his handsome features, making him seem even more restrained, even more untouchable. Then, a faint snore came from the front seat. At that very moment, the man's head tilted slightly toward me. Our eyes met. Quietly, he formed a sentence with his lips, a question. Resting his head against one hand, he asked, "Are you looking at me?" Calvin's expression remained as calm as ever, yet my heartbeat suddenly skipped, because his eyes were clearly saying, "See? I knew you'd look at me." Before I could react, something cool suddenly brushed against my bare calf beneath my fitted knit dress. The so-called gentleman was lazily rubbing his leg against mine, lightly, slowly, drawing closer and closer. I could even feel the tense heat of the muscles beneath his dark trousers. The sensation sent warmth spreading through my body. I lifted my eyes to look at him. Was he flirting with me? His Adam's apple moved once, but he didn't stop. Instead, he loosened his tie slightly and smiled with casual ease. "So your taste has gotten younger?" Lily. My name was never spoken aloud, only shaped silently with his lips. Yet coming from him again, it somehow sounded intimate, lingering, dangerously so. At some point, the snoring from the front seat had disappeared. Before I could answer, Lazaro suddenly turned around as if awakened by the conversation. His gaze tightened as it moved between us. "You two knew each other before?" Chapter 5. The air froze for a moment, Calvin spoke first. I just remembered. We met before in Country A, apparently recalling what my circumstances had been like back then. Lazaro visibly relaxed, turning back around. He laughed. Then you two really are connected by fate. But he was paying so much attention to our expressions that he had no idea what happened the moment he turned away, hidden from everyone's sight. That polished black dress shoe became even bolder, hooking around my foot, deliberately, provocatively, trapping it between his own. Once again, the man silently formed words with his lips. He asked, "Exciting?" In an instant, I remembered. Back then, I had shaken off his hand and walked away just like this, into a freezing wind sharp enough to cut through bone. The last thing I said to him had been, "I like things a little more exciting. You're kind of boring." Calvin Tang. Back then, he wasn't a Tang yet, and he wasn't the type to hold grudges. He had only stood there with reddened eyes, holding my hand and saying not to leave, that he would learn anything at all. Chapter 6. When I found myself locked inside a suite with Calvin, I realized that this man had indeed learned quite a lot, though I had no idea where he had learned it. Just as I had no idea a 6-star hotel's soundproofing could be this terrible. Laura, isn't sharing a room a bit much? What if? Lazaro, just trust me, okay? Or are you worried about something? Come on, that's impossible. With Uncle's gentlemanly personality, nothing would happen even if they stayed together for 10 years. And if Lily can even pass Uncle's test, that'll definitely prove how sincere she is about you. That's true, then let's wait a little longer. As Lazaro's approving voice sounded from the room next door, Lara's playful laughter followed. Mixed among those sounds were several low chuckles from the man standing before me. Calvin had me pressed lightly against the back of the door, giving no sign of retreating. This time, he finally voiced everything he had been holding back. In a husky voice near my ear, he asked, "Exciting, Lily?" Damn, what a grudge-holding man. Without avoiding him, I met his dark gaze directly. My hand slid down and tugged on his loosened tie. Our uneven breaths drew impossibly close. Calvin, is this what a gentleman would do? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Do you like gentlemen? They're okay, I guess. After all, I wasn't exactly a good person either." I kept that last part to myself. The next second, something cold and metallic was placed into my palm. With a faint smile, he said, "Good thing I'm not a gentleman." Looking down, I saw a pair of silver handcuffs. I froze. Meanwhile, he calmly fastened one cuff around his own wrist, then handed me the other end. "Lily," he spoke my name softly, forcing me to look at him. "You used to like these the most, didn't you?" Chapter 7. The corners of my lips curved upward, as if I were genuinely pleased. Then, in the very next second, I moved closer to him. The moment the man's breathing faltered, I fastened the other cuff around the equally cold door handle. Immediately afterward, footsteps sounded outside. The door burst open with a loud bang. Everything happened too fast to process. What Lazaro saw was an extremely complicated scene. Calvin and I were standing almost pressed against each other. Lazaro's pupils contracted. He looked like a volcano on the verge of eruption. Then his gaze landed on the handcuff attached to Calvin's wrist. Instantly, he relaxed. He even seemed somewhat pleased as he suppressed the emotions surging inside him. Apparently, he assumed I had handcuffed Calvin because I was afraid of making him angry. But only moments later, Lazaro returned to his indignant expression and demanded righteously, "Lily, why are you in the same room as my uncle? And why are you standing so close to him? I'm your boyfriend. Don't you understand basic boundaries?" For once, I didn't follow the script and comfort him. I simply watched him perform. By now, I understood Lazaro perfectly. No matter how well I behaved, he would always find fault. From beginning to end, what he wanted was this self-directed drama, even when it was his chosen test subject. Even when he was the one who arranged for the door to be locked, he still needed me to drown in guilt. All to satisfy his endless vanity. In the past, I might have played along, but now, I was tired, and I no longer had the patience, especially when compared to another face. His suddenly seemed so much less impressive. Everything felt unbearably dull. Unfortunately, Lazaro didn't see it that way. Instead, my indifference infuriated him. With a cold laugh, he declared, "If you care so little about this relationship, then let's just break up." With that, he slammed the door and left. Behind him, Laura, who had been enjoying the spectacle, shot me a contemptuous look and followed. The chaotic scene instantly returned to being just Calvin and me. "You have the key." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I looked up at Calvin. As I turned to leave, he called out to me, standing beneath the dim hallway light, hands still cuffed to the door. He smiled as though none of it bothered him. Within those deep black eyes, I had become his entire world. He said, "Lily, I spoke too soon. Your taste hasn't just gotten younger, it's gotten worse, now." He was the smug one. Chapter 8. When I left the hotel, Laura was still standing outside. The moment she saw me, she walked over. "Lily," her voice remained soft and sweet, though not exactly friendly. Without waiting for permission, she linked her arm through mine. "You're not actually thinking Uncle would fall for you, are you? Instead of chasing after Lazaro? I never expected you to be even more naive than me. Lazaro treats you like this despite your background, and you're still not satisfied. I honestly feel sorry for him." I couldn't be bothered listening to her nonsense. Shaking off her hand, I hailed a taxi. Before getting in, I turned around and said directly, "Laura, if you like Lazaro, just go after him. Telling me won't accomplish anything. We've already broken up." Her face immediately shifted between pale and red. Whatever she wanted to say was cut off as I shut the car door, finally blocking out the unnecessary noise. Lara's family stood fairly low even among Lazaro's extended relatives, but she knew how to act cute and read the room. That made her quite popular. Still, she only ever revolved around Lazaro. Anyone with eyes could see her intentions. I had simply chosen to ignore it. After all, Lazaro never really crossed the line. His behavior stayed at the level of flirtatious words, and I wasn't exactly deep myself. What I cared about was only a handsome face. Although we had broken up, not just Laura but almost everyone assumed it was only temporary. Sooner or later, I would go back and win Lazaro over. They even organized a gathering behind my back. My own family didn't want to lose the opportunity to strengthen ties with the Tang family either, so they helped trick me into attending. When I arrived, Lazaro was already seated in the center of the room with his arm around Laura, drinking enthusiastically. As he drank, he kept pouring alcohol for the blushing Laura beside him. When he noticed me, he merely raised an eyebrow before returning to his drink. One of his friends laughed awkwardly and tried to persuade me. "Lily, don't take it the wrong way. Lazaro's just trying to make you jealous and let you experience what it's like to chase after him. Just go comfort him and everything will be fine." I frowned, genuinely confused. Why would I comfort him? He was the one who suggested breaking up. He was also the one who locked the door. I truly couldn't think of a single reason why I should be the one apologizing. Not to mention, looking at that once handsome face now twisted by alcohol. I didn't even feel like speaking. My question completely stunned him. For a long moment, he couldn't come up with a response. Then a familiar voice called out to me, "Hello, we meet again." I turned around. Calvin was sitting at another table, smiling faintly in my direction. If not for the fact that, after I sat across from him, he mischievously nudged my leg under the table with his foot, he would have looked perfectly polite. Chapter 9. I was starting to suspect Calvin had attended some questionable finishing school somewhere. The last time, I had literally handcuffed him to a door, yet he still refused to give up flirting with me. Dressed in a black turtleneck sweater, he looked restrained and respectable. His sharp features appeared even more composed and untouchable. On the surface, he casually sipped his drink, politely acknowledging the endless compliments directed his way. But beneath the dark tablecloth, those long legs of his crossed every boundary without hesitation. Last time it had only been inside a car. This time, it was right in the middle of a gathering. He was becoming bolder and bolder. I shot him a warning look, only to find myself falling into the depths of his dark eyes. The curve of his lips never changed. Meanwhile, those black Chelsea boots began brushing rhythmically against the pointed tip of my red high heel. Little by little, pressing forward until my territory was completely occupied, sending waves of tingling warmth through me. Just then, a gossip-loving guest beside me whispered, "Lily, what? Are you interested in Mr. Tang too? My advice? You'd better hurry up and make up with Lazaro. That old-fashioned giant isn't someone just anyone can reach. Some people even say he's not interested in women." I couldn't help smiling as I took a small sip of wine. He is pretty old-fashioned. As for the rest, at that point, I looked directly toward the man and raised my glass. Under countless curious gazes, I smiled. "Mr. Tang, care for a drink?" His Adam's apple moved. Only after a long pause did he respond with a simple, "MHM." The veins on his long fingers stood out as he gripped the wine glass. No one paid attention to what seemed like an ordinary toast, and no one knew that at that exact same moment, my high heel was quietly tracing its way up the leg of his dark trousers, higher, until it reached the tense, heated muscle of his thigh, then, seemingly by accident, slid slightly inward, stopping at the last possible moment. A low, muffled sound came from the other end of the table, followed by a concerned voice. "Mr. Tang, are you all right? Flirting?" It wasn't as though I didn't know how. Chapter 10. Perhaps I had been too focused. At some point, I stopped noticing the sounds around me. The constant persuasion ringing in my ears had fallen silent. Two figures cast shadows over me. Lazaro and Lara had walked directly to my side. His eyes remained fixed on me, as though waiting for something. "I'm planning to give things a try with Lara. Aren't you going to say anything?" "Lily." My name was squeezed out through clenched teeth. Slowly withdrawing my foot, I stood and raised my glass. "Then I wish you two a lifetime of happiness." Seeing Lazaro's face darken as he prepared to speak again, I immediately cut him off. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." Without giving him another glance, I walked out of the hall. After turning a corner, I headed not toward the restroom, but toward the club's exit. This gathering was truly a waste of time. I had barely finished the thought when a large hand suddenly pulled me into a private room. The space was dimly lit. Luxurious velvet furniture could be seen through the darkness. Large stretches of plush carpeting covered the floor. The room was clearly far more lavish than the others. Everything about it felt unusual. A man's breathing echoed beside my ear. Soft, dangerously intimate, a familiar, husky breath. Without resisting, I allowed myself to be led to a crimson velvet sofa. Calvin knelt before me on one knee. Loose strands of black hair cast scattered shadows across his forehead. "Lily." He spoke my name, his dark eyes fixed on me like a predator watching its prey. Then his well-defined fingers caught hold of a silver glint hidden beneath the black turtleneck. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled it downward. Before I could marvel at the clever design of the sweater, I saw it. Around that pale neck was a black collar adorned with silver willow-like detailing. Attached to it hung a slender silver chain. Under the dim lighting, it reflected a mesmerizing sheen, swaying gently, back and forth. My heartbeat accelerated with it. Back then, during the years when we were both poor, I had stubbornly forced that outrageous thing around his sensitive, rigid neck. At the time, Calvin had asked in a trembling voice, "Do we really have to do this?" Now, there was nothing either of us lacked. Outside the room, distant voices and laughter filled the air. I asked, "You're not afraid anymore?" He placed the silver chain into my palm, tilting his head back as though offering a sacrifice. He looked impossibly obedient. Then he said, "I wouldn't have it any other way." Chapter 11. This was a temptation no hunter could resist. I tightened the silver chain and pressed my forehead against his. "Calvin, I've already rejected you once." What I meant was, I didn't have the patience, nor would I push him away a second time. He would have to bear the consequences himself. Moving downward, I lightly bit the prominent Adam's apple at his throat. A muffled groan escaped him involuntarily, and his breathing immediately lost its rhythm. Instinctively, he reached toward my face. I tugged the silver chain, stopping him. "Be good. I haven't said you can start yet." Rising to my feet, I looked down at him. My gaze traced every contour of his face, little by little, until I noticed the muscles in his arm, tense with restraint, veins standing out clearly beneath the skin. Then I leaned in and kissed him. The air between them grew chaotic. After years apart, intense, overwhelming emotions surged free all at once. He kissed like a beast wounded by abandonment, carrying both resentment and caution. Something inside my chest trembled softly. My fingers slipped into his thick hair, gripping it again and again. Between breaths, I called his name, Calvin. I'm here. His answer came in the form of an even deeper hunger in his eyes, and a fiercer determination. Before I knew it, I had sunk into the soft velvet cushions. In my dizzy haze, a commotion suddenly erupted outside the room. It sounded as though someone was searching for me. Lazaro's voice was especially distinct. Didn't she say she was going to the restroom? Where is she? Lazaro, calm down. Maybe Lily wasn't feeling well and left already. Right then, the sound of someone rattling the door echoed from outside. My body instinctively stiffened. I turned toward the entrance. The man beside me, however, remained completely unfazed. Instead, he stepped even closer. Lily, focus. Drawing me into his arms, he positioned me facing the door. His voice remained calm. Don't be afraid. This place belongs to me. I designed it myself. Outside, another voice tried to persuade Lazaro. Stop trying, Lazaro. These rooms can't be opened from the outside. They're custom-made for the owner. Damn it! A heavy bang struck the door. The noise echoed through the room. At that moment, everything seemed to reach its breaking point. I lightly bit down on Calvin's shoulder. Exciting? Lowering his eyes, he met my gaze. The emotions hidden within them were so intense they nearly swallowed me whole. At that moment, I finally realized 5 years had been enough to transform that cold, inexperienced young man into a greedy, insatiable beast. Chapter 12. 5 years ago, in Country A, the endless winter was an inescapable nightmare for the poor. That was also when I found Calvin. I was poor, and I wasn't a good person. So when I saw a young man crouching on a street corner, with nowhere to go, my first thought was simple. He could probably help me with a lot of work and get us through the winter, and with a frame much larger than mine. He was probably warm, too, so I reached out my hand. Coming or not, I'll take care of you. That night, I brought him back to the basement apartment, a cramped, airless place barely large enough for 2 people. For the next 5 years, we stayed there, because the room was so small. His warm embrace gradually became my bed. Back then, Calvin was a few years older than me. He took everything seriously, almost excessively so. Faced with a troublesome situation like ours, he never complained. Instead, he quietly took care of everything for me and accommodated every request I made. But what could I do? I'd already said it. I wasn't a good person, and my worst impulse was this. I wanted to see someone as upright as him break his own rules. I wanted to stain those cool, distant eyes, to make him lose himself because of me. So during the second winter, I was the first to cross the line. My excuse was simple. I was cold. I needed warmth, in more ways than one. As time went on, spoiled by his indulgence, I became increasingly unreasonable. Handcuffs, blindfolds, collars, all of them were my creations back then, inside that increasingly warm and enclosed space. Even when he stood on the edge of losing control, the young man never forgot to kiss my forehead. If it hurts, call my name. That's what he said. That winter, 2 wandering hearts, along with 2 bodies that had known loneliness for far too long, finally became one. It was the warmest winter of my life. If nothing had changed, I would have been willing to keep living that way forever. But only if I hadn't been crazy, only if I hadn't noticed the obsessive desire growing inside me. I needed to know where he was, what he was doing, everything that belonged to him, at all times. Sometimes, staring at his slender figure from behind, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. If I could keep him from leaving, wouldn't he belong entirely to me? But it shouldn't have been like that. The small, inconvenient piece of conscience I still possessed awakened. It told me that someone like him shouldn't be destroyed by such unhealthy desires, shouldn't spend his entire life trapped in a dark, damp basement. Honestly, he deserved better. One morning, walking alone through empty streets. I received a phone call from across the ocean. The caller claimed to be my biological father. He talked for a very long time, but all I could think about was something else. If a story ended at its highest point, wouldn't it avoid having to face the fall afterward? And so, at the end of that winter, the moment the bells in the square began to ring, I made the decision to run away for the first time. Chapter 13. On New Year's Eve, the Tang family held a small holiday gathering. The guests were mostly close relatives and business associates. Naturally, Lazaro was among them. Originally, he had planned to bring me as his companion, but after being unable to reach me, he had no choice but to bring Lara instead. As Lazaro and Lara entered arm in arm, they ran straight into Calvin Tang. Remembering the earlier test, Lazaro felt somewhat awkward. Still, it had been his own idea, so he took the initiative and greeted him warmly. "Uncle, long time no see. It hasn't been that long. I attended that gathering too." Really? Lazaro couldn't remember much from the alcohol-fueled night in question and could only force a smile. Then he quickly changed the subject. "This is my cousin Lara. She's always wanted to meet you. What about Lily?" Lazaro froze when he was interrupted. He didn't even register how intimate the way Calvin addressed me sounded. Instinctively, he answered vaguely, She wasn't feeling well. We'll talk about it later." As though admitting we had broken up was somehow humiliating. "Is that so?" Calvin smiled faintly. The same familiar question. For some reason, a wave of irritation washed over Lazaro. For once, he forgot his manners. Without even saying goodbye, he walked past the uncle he had admired for so long, and entered the banquet hall. Yet the first person he saw wasn't anyone else. It was me, dressed elegantly and seated in the center of the room. Calvin had given the seat of honor to me. Raising my glass politely yet distantly, I welcomed them and invited them to sit. And for the very first time, Lazaro realized something was wrong. Chapter 14. After dinner, the gathering moved on to a New Year's Truth or Dare game. Earlier, Lazaro had secretly discussed a plan with a few of his friends attending the party. During the game, he intended to use the opportunity to propose to me. He had even arranged for someone to deliver the ring in advance. "Lazaro, are you really going to propose to Lily?" "Forget it. If she came all the way to this gathering, she obviously still has feelings for me. Besides, she was willing to handcuff Uncle before. She was definitely just acting out of anger. I'll propose and smooth things over." Damn, Lazaro. That's actually pretty romantic. Reading the text through my hacking software, I almost laughed from irritation. With reasoning like that, there probably wasn't anything else worth seeing, so I remotely uninstalled the program. The game began. The very first round landed on me. I chose truth. The person asking the question happened to be one of Lazaro's friends. He shot Lazaro a meaningful look before excitedly asking, "Is the person you like here tonight?" The moment the question was asked, Lazaro's gaze locked onto me. I didn't look at him. After a long silence, I finally answered, "Yes." The moment the answer left my mouth, the room erupted with cheers. Lazaro immediately sat up straighter, unable to hide the satisfaction on his face. I knew exactly why he looked so pleased. Because he assumed I was talking about him. And not just him. Most people in the room thought the same thing. After all, Lazaro's habit of causing trouble every few days only for me to comfort him afterward had become something of a famous story within our social circle. Several more rounds passed. Then it was Calvin's turn. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, he was seated right beside Lazaro. This time, Lazaro became the one asking the question. After what had happened earlier, he looked much more relaxed. He seemed convinced that he had simply overthought things. So he looked toward the uncle he had admired for years and asked casually, "Uncle, you don't mind a personal question, do you?" "Go ahead. Is the person you like here tonight?" By this point, Lazaro had already imagined 100 different ways Calvin might politely answer no. But to everyone's surprise, the man merely nodded and said, "MHM." The room exploded with even louder reactions than before. Everyone was suddenly desperate to know who this famously reserved man liked. But Lazaro noticed something. At the exact moment Calvin answered, the direction he looked toward was one Lazaro knew all too well. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Almost instinctively, Lazaro hurried the game along. All right, enough. Next person, as though fate had planned it. The next turn landed on me again. All eyes turned toward me. This time, I chose Dare. Lazaro visibly relaxed. According to his plan, if I was chosen again, he wanted to steer me toward picking Dare. One of his friends grinned excitedly and read out the challenge they had prepared long ago. Please kiss the person you like for 3 minutes. Lazaro's gaze was so intense it felt as though it could pierce straight through me. The anticipation in his eyes was impossible to miss. I knew all of that. But unfortunately, the person I wanted to kiss had never been him. Chapter 15. I stood up and walked toward Lazaro. The cheers around the room grew louder. To everyone present, my choice seemed obvious. Lazaro's lips curled into a knowing smile, but in the next second, I walked right past him and stopped behind Calvin. Bang! Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, fireworks exploded across the night sky. I grabbed Calvin's tie and met his eyes. Those faintly smiling eyes shimmered with reflected light. Beautiful. Dangerous. Like an abyss. Then I kissed him. The moment I relaxed my guard, the man rose to his feet and immediately took control. As if he couldn't wait to show the world the treasure he had finally regained. He held me close and kissed me deeply, like he wanted to break me apart and weave me into his very bones. I had no choice but to wrap my arms around his waist and rise onto my toes to meet him halfway. I don't know whether 3 minutes passed. I only knew that the room had become terrifyingly silent. For a moment, even breathing seemed to stop. Then came a faint metallic clink. I turned my head. A silver ring rolled from Lazaro's palm and fell to the floor like a shooting star. He rose unsteadily to his feet, staring at me in disbelief. Lily, how could you? Why couldn't she? Calvin stepped in front of me. And from now on, you should call her aunt. His tone remained calm. Yet somehow, those words instantly ignited Lazaro. His eyes reddened with fury. Even the wine glass beside him was hurled violently across the room. Uncle, you knew she was my girlfriend. Lara jumped in fright and tried to grab him. Lazaro, but he shook her off without a word. The entire room descended into chaos. Chapter 16. Calvin Tang paid no attention to Lazaro's rage. Instead, he calmly instructed the family steward to escort everyone out. My apologies, everyone. The Tang family has a private matter to handle. Only after the room had been emptied did he slowly turn his gaze back toward Lazaro. Lazaro, I'll say this one last time. She is no longer your girlfriend. And even if she were, so what? Have you forgotten what you asked me to do back then? But it was just a game. Lazaro's eyes were bloodshot. He had abandoned all pretense of manners as he shouted. Calvin, I trusted you so damn much. You shameless old man. Tisk. Calvin's normally composed voice carried a rare trace of coldness. I don't recall ever agreeing to any game. From the very beginning, I was serious. And whether you asked me or not, I would have done the same thing. Lily. His voice softened immediately, lowering his eyes. He looked at me. To my surprise, he almost sounded aggrieved. Am I really that old? I reached up and patted his face reassuringly. Not at all. To me, you're the most handsome and charming man here. The moment the words left my mouth, Lazaro's eyes turned red first. Lily, I was here first. You can't do this. No, I smiled calmly. To be accurate, he was here first. What? Lazaro froze. His gaze dropped to our tightly intertwined hands. Country A. Damn it. In an instant, everything connected. Something finally clicked into place. With a curse, Lazaro charged forward. His clenched fist flew toward Calvin's face. But before anyone could react, he was stopped effortlessly. In the next moment, Calvin struck first. His fist landed hard. Even though I'm your uncle, that doesn't mean I haven't wanted to hit you. 3 years ago, I should have taught you properly. If you don't know how to cherish something, then don't take away something precious to someone else. There are consequences for that. Do you understand? Each sentence was followed by another punch. Completely overwhelmed, Lazaro couldn't fight back at all. It was the first time I had ever seen Calvin like this. In front of me, despite being a few years older, he had always been calm, patient, willing to indulge me in everything. But now, his eyes were cold. The veins on the back of his hands stood out sharply. It was as though years of suppressed anger had finally shattered the mask of restraint. That night lasted quite a while. Lazaro ultimately left for the hospital on a stretcher. He wouldn't be leaving for at least 2 or 3 months. The entire time. I never tried to stop it, partly because someone with Lazaro's way of thinking genuinely needed a wake-up call, and partly because the Calvin of that moment was surprisingly captivating, especially with blood staining his knuckles. Chapter 17. After that night. News that the Tang family's uncle and nephew had turned against each other because of a woman spread throughout their social circle. Everyone was discussing my methods. My family became even more enthusiastic, calling constantly and even talking about visiting in person. I simply turned off my phone and moved in with Calvin. Originally, I thought that would be the end of it, until a month and a half later, while Calvin was out. Lazaro came looking for me. He carried a stack of documents and a phone. Apparently, Calvin hadn't hit him hard enough. Oblivious to my impatience, Lazaro pointed excitedly at the documents. "Lily, you still love me, don't you? Otherwise, you wouldn't have installed so much surveillance software on my phone. You even put listening devices in my clothes, right? Just admit it. You've only been temporarily distracted by that guy. If you come back, we'll get married." The ring appeared in his hand once more. His eyes searched my face triumphantly, looking for any sign of hesitation. So he had discovered it after all. I sighed. It was time to shatter those unnecessary fantasies. You can think of those things as one of my personal habits. It doesn't mean I liked you that much. What I like is the feeling of having everything I consider mine completely under my control. What are you talking about? Lazaro's expression went blank for a second before he instinctively asked. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I asked, Lazaro, you didn't actually love me that much either, did you? It's fair, really. Your face satisfied certain preferences of mine, so playing along with all those dramatic performances you staged wasn't that difficult. The documents crumpled in Lazaro's trembling hand. His voice shook as he interrupted. You knew all along, didn't you? Chapter 18. Sometimes, you really shouldn't expect too much from someone's intelligence. I pointed at the phone. I always knew. But you seem not to understand that sincerity doesn't survive being constantly tested. Besides, I've never really had any sincerity to offer. No sincerity. He repeated the words to himself several times. His eyes reddened as he blurted out. Then what was I? At that exact moment, a voice came from the doorway. Lily, are you all right? Calvin had returned. I turned my head and smiled. Didn't you already figure it out? Lazaro stared at the tall figure walking toward us through the backlight. And little by little, a truth became impossible to ignore. From the very beginning, he had merely been a substitute. A substitute for the man standing before him. The man who resembled him by perhaps 50%. Who stood taller than him. And who was already the head of the Tang family. A few seconds before Calvin reached us, I slipped a prepared USB drive into Lazaro's hand. Then I whispered my final warning into his ear. You don't actually think all that surveillance was only for my personal habits, do you? If you keep bothering me, I don't mind making the backups of everything inside public. Lazaro had always been a reckless rich heir. He had gotten involved with plenty of questionable things behind the scenes. Naturally, all of that had been recorded as well. After Lazaro left in silence, Calvin wrapped his arms around me from behind, almost sounding jealous. He brushed lightly against the side of my neck. What did he say when he came here? Nothing. I told him to get lost. I turned my head. The evening sunlight painted his smiling eyes with a soft golden glow. For a moment, it overlapped with the smile of the young man who had once stepped into my life on that street corner years ago. And I thought, perhaps it was better if he never knew. Maybe tomorrow would be a good day to see a therapist. Chapter 19. In the end, I had still underestimated Lazaro. Or perhaps I had never imagined he would go to such extremes. So when I received that anonymous text message, I panicked. It read, "If he's gone, will you come back to me?" I cursed under my breath. At that exact moment, the television news began reporting an explosion on Beltway B Highway. I remembered clearly. That was part of Calvin's route for the afternoon. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I flipped through my contacts. Unexpectedly, Calvin's call came first. The moment I answered and heard his steady breathing on the other end, the tension crushing my chest finally eased. He seemed to have anticipated my panic. His calm voice carried a reassuring strength. "Lily, don't be afraid. Lazaro has been sent to Africa. And I'm fine. Check what I sent you." Only then did I notice the link he had posted in our chat. I clicked it. A monitoring application opened automatically, one I didn't even know had been installed. Inside was a highly visible location marker, along with countless surveillance feeds. That marker is me. I installed cameras everywhere I might go. My office, my car, my clothes. "What are you doing?" I interrupted urgently, as though stopping him would somehow hide the part of myself I was ashamed to admit. Yet I watched the location marker move closer and closer, until it reached the door, then slowly approached me. Calvin lowered his eyes and met my gaze. The moment I felt the urge to run, he pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly it felt as though he wanted to fuse me into his bones. "It's okay, Lily. I look forward to being watched by you. I want it. If possible, I'd give you everything, even my life, for the first time." His beautiful eyes shone with unmistakable stubbornness. His voice carried an almost reverent sincerity. I had never seen him like this before. I couldn't even find the strength to push him away. The only thing I managed to say was, "Are you crazy?" He didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed softly. I am. So you'll have to take responsibility for me. Watch me for the rest of my life." He gently rested his head on my shoulder. "Lily, don't abandon me again, okay?" Warm moisture touched the side of my neck, making my chest ache. Those tears felt like 5 years of loneliness finally spilling over, like an animal exposing its most vulnerable side. "Calvin, why are you only crying now? And why am I only now understanding the grief you never spoke aloud? I dragged you into the whirlpool, yet never taught you how to leave. I really was terrible, so allow me to be just a little worse." I stroked his hair gently. "All right, I'll take responsibility for you forever. A mad woman, a patient. Perhaps they truly were made for each other." Chapter 20. Calvin's perspective. Calvin's life lost its light completely after his parents were murdered. He became one of countless drifters in Country A, aimless, like a wandering ghost, until one day, a girl boldly extended her hand toward him. On a freezing winter night, just as his soul was about to freeze over, he took that hand. That girl was Lily. She always claimed she wasn't a good person, but honestly, Calvin had never met anyone kinder. In some ways, he was the truly unhealthy one. He would walk every street she had visited, collect everything she had touched. The difference was simply that he hid it well. He understood better than anyone what Lily liked, and what she hated, so he suppressed the overwhelming love inside him, remaining calm, principled, serious, giving her everything she wanted. But perhaps he hid it too well, or perhaps he miscalculated. Lily ran away. His soul ran away. Calvin often thought there was something he should have told her. For him, if his head did not fall at her feet, then carrying it on his shoulders felt like a burden. His obsession ran far deeper than hers ever had. But that kind of love would crush her heart, and so he was reduced to this, afraid even to speak her name, afraid that doing so would cause his soul to leave his chest. Then, after 1,825 sleepless nights, after Calvin finally regained the ability to search for her, after seeing her call another man her boyfriend, he decided to try a different approach, to reclaim his soul, perhaps with a few props, perhaps with a few tears. This time, his love would be neither too much, nor too little.